I look exactly like my mom from the moment I was born. I was daddy's little princess. But behind closed doors, mom's manicured nails, sparkling diamonds at the tips, often dug into my tiny baby arm. "You little thing," she hissed one day, her voice dripping venom. "Already learned to steal men, huh? You don't deserve this face." Even as an infant, I somehow knew the truth. In my past life, Mom had hated me with a quiet, simmering intensity. By the time I was 1, her rage had nearly killed me. She had pushed me down the stairs in a moment of careless desperation, hoping to save herself. But I wasn't going down without a fight. I spat right in her face, in front of everyone, and watched as the world shifted. Her gentle, beautiful face contorted instantly, twisted by anger, while Grandma, a silent witness, watched with eyes that had seen far too much. Mom's expression flickered, a mask of horror and disbelief, but before Dad could react, she smoothed it back into her usual soft, sweet facade. Tears welled in her eyes as she spoke, her voice trembling with false innocence. "Why, does the baby seem to dislike me? Is something wrong with me?" She lifted her wrist to her nose, as if smelling herself could explain it, her voice breaking. Dad rushed to her side, pulling her close protectively. "Don't be ridiculous," he said firmly. "She's just a baby. She doesn't understand anything. You've just given birth. Your body is weak. Don't overthink it." I sneered inwardly. Exactly what I remembered. Mom's beauty and fragility were weapons, honed to hit Dad right where it hurt. In my past life, his blind favoritism had been my death sentence. But this time, I had backup. Grandma had lived over 60 years and seen more manipulative women than Mom had drunk cups of tea. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, never wavered. "Children are pure," she said, calm and unwavering. "They are drawn to those who genuinely care for them. Since the baby doesn't like you, Susan, you should focus on recovering. I'll take care of her." Her words froze the entire living room. Mom's face drained of color, disbelief and shock mingling in her tear-streaked features. "Mom, what do you mean? I'm Emma's real mother. How can you not let a real mother take care of her own child?" Grandma's voice didn't falter. "I'm not saying you can't, but you've just given birth. Your health comes first, Jake. You two stop focusing solely on the baby and pay attention to your wife." Her tone was precise, flawless, leaving no room for argument. She offered a way out for Dad while laying down a quiet, undeniable warning to Mom. Dad hesitated, then nodded. "Mom's right. Your health is most important. When Emma's older, you can take care of her." Susan's lips trembled, hatred sharpening in her eyes like a blade. I nestled into Grandma's arms and, for the first time, gave her a toothless, mischievous smile. Provocative, daring, and entirely mine. From that day forward, Grandma took me under her wing. Her courtyard, part of the sprawling Johnson family mansion in the historic district, was just far enough from my parents' main house to feel like a sanctuary, yet close enough to keep tabs on them. Of course, Mom didn't give up. Barely out of postpartum recovery, she dressed elegantly every day, arriving at Grandma's gates with trays of exotic soups, her every action a calculated performance of the devoted mother-in-law. "Mom, I made this bird's nest soup especially for you. Mom, I came to check on Emma. Was she good today?" But no amount of jewelry, silk, or sweet words could touch the bond one had already formed with Grandma. "Emma, sweetheart, will you let Mommy hold you?" Every time she said those words, my inner actress came alive. The moment her perfumed presence drifted near, I unleashed my award-winning performance, a wail so piercing it could crack crystal. My tiny face turned crimson, my breath hitched, and tears spilled down like rain. But the instant Grandma or Martha, the housekeeper, took me into their arms, the crying would stop as if by magic. A few pitiful sniffles later, I'd blink up at them with innocent, trusting eyes. It didn't take long for the entire Johnson household to reach a consensus. Little Miss Emma was simply incompatible with her birth mother. At first, Dad thought it was just coincidence. He tried to bridge the gap with gentle persistence, sitting me on his lap and speaking in that soft tone I remembered so well. "Emma, this is Mommy. Mommy loves you more than anyone." Then he tried to hand me over. The second Susan's hands reached out, I clung to his shirt with both hands and feet, trembling like a leaf in a storm. My sobs came raw and broken, almost panicked. It wasn't just an act. Somewhere deep inside, the terror of my past life still lived, clawing its way to the surface. Dad froze, his expression stricken. He had no idea what to do. Meanwhile, Susan's face shifted from green to white and back again. She forced out a brittle smile as tears welled in her eyes. "Jake," she whispered brokenly. "Forget it, it's my fault. I guess I'm just not meant to be a mother. Even my own daughter hates me." Perfect delivery. Her performance was flawless, soft, tragic, manipulative. She looked like the picture of a wounded saint. Grandma, however, wasn't fooled. Her sharp eyes lingered on Susan before she spoke, her voice calm but commanding. "Enough. Don't force the child. She's still young, probably just shy around strangers.
Susan, go rest.
Emma needs her milk." After my parents left, Grandma sat rocking me in her arms, her palm rhythmically patting my back. She sighed, low and thoughtful. "Martha, did you notice anything?" Martha hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Ma'am, if I may, when the missus looks at little miss, there's no warmth in her eyes. No love. Just something else." Grandma's gaze darkened. I'd won the first round, but suspicion wasn't enough. I needed Dad to start doubting her too, and fate handed me the perfect stage. My 3-month celebration. The Johnsons spared no expense. The mansion was alive with laughter, music, and the clinking of crystal. Guests filled the grand hall, praising the beautiful little princess. "She looks exactly like Susan," someone cooed. "Those eyes. She's going to be stunning when she grows up." Susan glided through the crowd in a champagne-colored gown, her makeup flawless, her smile soft and warm. To the world, she was a picture of elegance, the devoted mother and perfect hostess. But every time she inched closer to hold me, I burst into tears, shattering her act like glass. Halfway through the party came the cake-cutting ceremony. Cameras flashed. The 3-tier cake gleamed under golden light. Susan stepped forward, insisting sweetly, "It's such an important day. A mother should hold her child." Before Grandma could refuse, Susan took me from her arms. Her hands tightened, too tight. My ribs ached, but I kept quiet. The main event was only seconds away. She carried me toward the towering cake, smiling beautifully for the crowd. "Honey, look how cute our Emma is," she called, her voice dripping charm. Dad's eyes softened as he reached to stroke my cheek. That was her cue. Her arms shifted ever so slightly, her body turning as if by accident, but her push was deliberate. The direction wasn't toward the cake. It was toward the towering pyramid of champagne glasses beside it. If I had fallen, the glass would have shattered, slicing my skin, maybe even my eyes. It would have been a tragedy, a perfect scene, a loving mother's clumsy mistake that drew sympathy and erased suspicion. But I wasn't the clueless baby I had been before. The instant I felt the push, I moved. My gums clamped down on the diamond brooch pinned to her chest, the one Dad had given her for their anniversary. The metal bit into my mouth, but I didn't let go. With all the strength my tiny body could muster, I jerked backward. The sound of ripping silk was faint beneath the party's noise, but Susan's sharp intake of breath cut through everything. Her custom gown tore open from the chest down. The diamond brooch hung by a single thread, its sharp edge glinting cruelly against her pale skin. Blood welled from a shallow cut, bright against her dress. Gasps echoed across the hall. Cameras flashed. Susan froze, realizing too late what had happened. The tear exposed just enough to ruin her image completely, not indecent, but humiliating beyond repair. Her scream pierced the air. She dropped me in shock, her hands flying to cover herself. "Mama." I gurgled softly, looking up with wide, innocent eyes as the room erupted into chaos. Inside, I smiled. Checkmate. Dad caught me before I hit the ground, his reflexes sharp despite the shock. The entire banquet hall had gone silent, save for Susan's theatrical sobs and the frantic clicking of cameras that would haunt her for weeks to come. "Someone get a blanket," Dad barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. Several guests rushed forward, coats and shawls materializing from nowhere to cover Susan's torn dress. But the damage was done. In that frozen moment, everyone had seen it. The perfect Susan Johnson, exposed and humiliated at her own daughter's celebration. The society pages would feast on this for months. "She bit me." Susan shrieked, her carefully constructed mask finally cracking. Her finger jabbed toward me, trembling with genuine rage. "That little monster bit me and ruined." "Susan." Dad's voice was sharp, warning. He held me protectively against his chest, his hand cradling my head. "She's 3 months old. Babies don't have malicious intent." I made my lower lip tremble, working up a few pitiful tears. The brooch had actually hurt my gums quite badly, and I let that pain show on my face. Blood, my blood, stained the corner of my mouth where the sharp metal had cut me. Grandma was at my side in an instant, her experienced eyes taking in the scene with frightening clarity. "The baby's bleeding," she announced loudly enough for the murmuring crowd to hear. "Martha, call Dr. Chin immediately." "But my dress," Susan started, then seemed to remember herself. She pressed a hand to her chest, where a thin line of blood seeped through her fingers. "I mean, is Emma all right? Did the brooch hurt her?" Too late. I'd seen it. That split second where her concern was entirely for herself, for her ruined image. And more importantly, so had Dad. His expression shifted, something cold and analytical entering his eyes as he looked at his wife. It was the same look he used in boardroom negotiations, weighing risks and lies. "Why were you carrying her near the champagne tower?" he asked quietly. Grandma was holding her by the cake. Susan's eyes widened, a flicker of panic before she smoothed it away. I wanted to hold my daughter." "Is that so wrong?" And she suddenly lunged. "Babies don't lunge," Grandma said flatly. "She's barely mastered holding her own head up." The crowd pressed closer, sensing drama more entertaining than any scripted performance. I could see several phones out now, recording everything.
Perfect.
I whimpered softly, reaching one tiny hand toward Dad's face while keeping my eyes locked on Susan. Let them see the fear. Let them see which parent the baby trusted. "Everyone, please," Dad said, his voice strained. "The party's over. Thank you for coming." As guests filed out in excited whispers, I caught snippets of conversation. "Did you see how the baby looked at her? That dress must have cost $20,000. Poor Susan, but honestly, babies know things, don't they? My grandmother always said children can sense evil." Susan stood frozen in her cocoon of borrowed fabrics, her perfect makeup streaked with tears, real ones now, born of rage and humiliation. Her eyes found mine over Dad's shoulder. For just a moment, the mask fell completely. The hatred in her gaze was pure, undiluted, murderous. She mouthed two words, silent but clear. "You'll pay." I smiled at her, gap-toothed and angelic. "Bring it on, Mother." The weeks following my 3-month celebration were delicious torture, for Susan anyway. The incident had gone viral on social media, thanks to several guests who couldn't resist posting. Hashtags like #BabyNose and #DiamondBroochGate trended for days. Society blogs published frame-by-frame analyses of the accident, with body language experts weighing in on whether Susan had deliberately positioned me near the champagne tower. Most damning was a slow-motion video that showed her arm shifting just slightly in a pushing motion before I'd bitten down on the brooch. Susan locked herself in the master bedroom for 3 days, claiming emotional distress. I heard through Martha, who heard through the other staff, that she'd smashed 2 vases and thrown her phone at the wall hard enough to crack the screen. Meanwhile, I continued my peaceful existence in Grandma's courtyard, perfecting the art of being adorable. "Such a clever girl," Grandma cooed one morning, watching me track a butterfly with intense focus. "Already so aware of everything around you." Too aware, I thought, as I grabbed at the silk tassel dangling from her sleeve. But Grandma's sharp eyes held a knowing glint that sometimes made me wonder exactly how much she suspected. Dad visited twice a day now, morning and evening, always looking more exhausted than the last time. The veneer of his perfect marriage was cracking, and even his formidable business acumen couldn't patch the fissures. "She won't come out of the bedroom," he confided to Grandma one evening, thinking I was asleep in my crib. I kept my breathing steady, my eyes closed. "She says she can't face anyone, that I'm choosing Emma over her." "Are you?" Grandma's voice was mild, but the question landed like a blade. Silence stretched between them. I could picture Dad's face, handsome, strong-jawed, used to being in control of every situation. This must be agony for him, watching his carefully constructed world unravel. "She's my daughter," he finally said. "My child. How can Susan expect me to what? Hide Emma away because their relationship is difficult." "Jake." Grandma's voice softened. "Have you considered that perhaps Susan's difficulty isn't just with bonding? That it might be something deeper?" "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that in all my years, I've never seen a mother look at her own child with such." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Resentment. Mom, that's Susan would never. Wouldn't she?" Another pause. "Just watch closely. That's all I ask." I heard Dad leave shortly after, his footsteps heavy on the courtyard stones. When Grandma approached my crib, I kept my eyes shut, but I felt her weathered hand stroke my hair gently. "You're fighting a battle, little one," she whispered. "I just wish I knew why. If only I could tell her. If only I could explain that in my previous life, this beautiful courtyard had been my tomb, that Susan's grief at my death had won her sympathy and Dad's guilt-ridden devotion, that she'd lived in luxury on his remorse while I'd been nothing but a tragic memory. But I was 3 months old, and words were still beyond me. Actions, however, were not. Susan's next move came wrapped in professional credentials and a sympathetic smile. "Jake, I've been thinking," she announced one morning at breakfast, her voice tremulous but determined. I was in Grandma's arms at the far end of the dining table, gumming on a teething ring. "Emma needs consistency, structure, and clearly, she needs help adjusting to me." Dad looked up from his newspaper, wary. "What kind of help?" "I've hired a specialized pediatric nurse," Susan continued, sliding a folder across the table. "Dr. Patricia Morrison recommended her. She has 15 years of experience with difficult infant-mother bonding situations." I stopped chewing on my toy. A nurse. Of course. A stranger in the house, someone loyal to Susan, someone who could be alone with me when Grandma wasn't watching. In my past life, Susan had brought in a nurse around this time too. A severe woman named Caroline who'd looked the other way when Susan's discipline got rough. Who documented every tantrum and difficult moment, building a case that I was a troubled child, that Susan was a saint for putting up with me. "That seems excessive," Dad said slowly. "Emma's healthy. She's thriving with Mom's care." "Thriving physically," Susan corrected, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But psychologically? Jake, she has panic attacks when I come near her. That's not normal. What if it's something neurological? What if we're missing something serious?" The manipulation was masterful. Frame it as concern for me. Make Dad feel like a neglectful father if he refused. Grandma's arms tightened around me. "The child doesn't need medical intervention. She needs time." "With respect, Mom," Susan's voice hardened almost imperceptibly, "you're not a doctor. And I am her mother. I have the right to seek professional help for my daughter." Legal ground. She was establishing her parental authority. I could see Dad's expression shift, torn between his mother's instincts and his wife's rights. "When would this nurse start?" he asked. "Tomorrow," Susan said quickly. "She's already done the background checks and health screenings. I've prepared a room next to the nursery." "In the main house?" Grandma interrupted. "Not here." Susan's smile was sweet poison.
Well, yes.
"It's time Emma moved back home, don't you think? She can't live in your courtyard forever. She needs to be with her parents." The trap was springing closed. A nurse. The main house. Away from Grandma's protection. I did the only thing I could. I started to cry. Not my usual dramatic wailing, but a soft, heartbroken sound that made even Dad flinch. "See," Susan said, standing. "She's already distressed. This is exactly why we need professional help." She moved toward me, hands outstretched. "Come to Mommy, sweetheart." I buried my face in Grandma's shoulder and ramped up the tears. My whole body shook with genuine fear because I knew that if I went back to that house, if I was left alone with Susan and her loyal nurse, I might not survive long enough to expose her. "Susan, stop," Dad commanded. "You're making it worse." Her hands froze in midair, trembling with suppressed rage. "I'm making it worse? I'm trying to help my daughter, and you side with your mother every single time. That's not fair. Isn't it?" Her voice rose, cracking. "Your mother has poisoned Emma against me from day one. She's turned my own child into a stranger who fears me. And now she's doing the same to you, isn't she? Making you doubt me, making you think I'm some kind of monster." The performance was flawless. Wounded wife, devoted mother, victimized by a controlling mother-in-law. In my past life, this speech had worked. Dad had felt guilty, apologized, and Susan had gotten exactly what she wanted. But this time, there was one crucial difference. "If you're not a monster," Grandma said quietly, "why does a baby who can't even talk yet fear you instinctively?" The silence that followed was deafening. Susan's face went through a fascinating transformation: shock, rage, calculation, and finally, cold determination. "Fine," she said, her voice now eerily calm. "If that's how it's going to be, I want a custody evaluation. Legal. Official. Let experts determine whether Emma is being properly cared for, or if she's being manipulated by. That's enough. Dad stood so abruptly his chair fell backward. No one is getting a custody evaluation. Emma stays with Mom for now. That's final. For now, Susan repeated, her smile sharp as broken glass. We'll see about that. She swept out of the dining room, and I sagged against Grandma in relief. But we'd won only this battle. The war was far from over, and Susan was just getting started. Nurse Caroline arrived the next morning despite Dad's decree, because Susan had signed the contract and paid a month in advance. Dad, caught between his wife's tears and his mother's warnings, agreed to a trial period. 1 week, he told Susan firmly. The nurse can observe and provide an assessment. Then we'll decide next steps. I studied Caroline from Grandma's arms as she entered the courtyard. Mid-50s, iron-gray hair pulled into a tight bun, pale eyes that catalogued everything with clinical detachment. She wore pristine white scrubs and carried a leather medical bag that looked expensive. Mrs. Johnson, she greeted Grandma with professional courtesy. And this must be Emma. She approached slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. Textbook technique for approaching a wary infant. Hello, sweetheart. I'm Nurse Caroline. I'm here to help. I didn't cry. That would be too predictable. Instead, I watched her with unnervingly direct eye contact for a 3-month-old, my expression blank and assessing. Caroline's smile faltered slightly. She's very alert. She's advanced for her age, Grandma said neutrally. Tracks movement, responds to voices, very aware of her surroundings. Caroline made a note on her tablet. And her reaction to her mother? Consistent distress, Grandma admitted, but calm and content with everyone else. Interesting. Another note. That suggests selective bonding rather than general anxiety. Has there been any trauma during Mrs. Susan Johnson's interactions with the child? Not that we've witnessed, Grandma said carefully. Though the incident at the party. Yes, I reviewed the footage. Caroline's expression remained neutral. Quite remarkable, actually, for an infant to bite down with such precision and force. Something in her tone made my skin prickle. Was she implying what I thought she was? Babies explore with their mouths, Grandma said firmly. The brooch was shiny, close to her face. Of course. Caroline smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I'm sure that's all it was. Over the next few days, Caroline shadowed Grandma and me like a crisp white ghost, documenting everything. When I ate, how I slept, my reactions to different stimuli. She was professional, thorough, and gave nothing away. But I noticed things. The way she positioned herself between me and the courtyard gates whenever we went outside. How she accidentally created situations where Susan could approach while Grandma was distracted. The detailed notes she took whenever I cried, especially documenting any time I was difficult. She was building a case. Not for Susan's inadequacy as a mother, but for mine as a child, unstable, possibly neurologically compromised, in need of specialized care that only a nurse could provide. Care that would conveniently take place in the main house, away from Grandma's oversight. On the 4th day, Susan visited during lunch. Caroline had suggested it, a controlled exposure, to help desensitize me to my mother's presence. Just 15 minutes, Caroline said soothingly. Let Emma see that her mother is safe and loving. Susan sat across from us at the courtyard table, her expression carefully neutral. She'd learned her lesson about overt approaches. Now she simply existed, talking to Grandma in soft tones about meaningless things. Weather, garden flowers, the new chef's menu. But I felt her attention like a physical weight, pressing down on me. Caroline watched us both with hawk eyes. This was a test, I realized. If I cried now, unprovoked by any threatening action, it would support the irrational fear narrative. If I stayed calm, it proved Susan wasn't the problem. I couldn't win. So, I changed the game. I looked directly at Susan and smiled, my biggest, most charming baby smile. Then I reached out one chubby hand toward her. Everyone froze. Susan's eyes widened in genuine shock. Caroline leaned forward, alert. Grandma's arms tensed around me, but she didn't pull me back. Emma? Susan whispered, something almost like hope flickering across her face. Do you want to come to Mommy? I kept reaching, gurgling happily. Let her think she'd won. Let her believe I'd finally been broken or that the desensitization was working. Susan stood slowly, moving toward me with the caution of someone approaching a wild animal. Her hands stretched out, trembling slightly. That's right, baby. Come to mommy. Caroline smiled triumphantly. Excellent progress. Mrs. Johnson, just take her gently. Susan's hands closed around my waist. For a brief moment, we were face to face, her holding me at arm's length. I saw it then, the exact moment her mask slipped. The cold calculation in her eyes, the way her fingers pressed just slightly too hard against my ribs. Then I vomited directly onto her Chanel blouse. Not just a little baby spit up. The full contents of my recently consumed lunch, pureed carrots and rice cereal, erupted in a spectacular orange cascade down her front. Susan shrieked, dropping me. Grandma caught me before I fell, her reflexes lightning quick. Oh, dear, Grandma said mildly, wiping my mouth with a cloth. I think the carrots didn't agree with her. Susan stood frozen, arms held out from her sides, her expensive blouse completely ruined. Her face cycled through emotions too quickly to track: rage, disgust, humiliation, before settling on wounded victim. She did that on purpose, Susan said flatly. Don't be ridiculous, Caroline interjected, but I could see doubt creeping into her expression. Babies can't vomit on command. Can't they? Susan's eyes locked on mine, and I smiled up at her, innocent as an angel. Look at her. She's smiling. Because she feels better after getting sick, Grandma said firmly. Susan, go change. Emma needs a nap. After Susan left, Caroline studied me with a new intensity. That was remarkable timing, she said quietly. Babies have sensitive stomachs, Grandma replied, but her own eyes were thoughtful as she looked down at me. I yawned widely and nestled into her shoulder, the picture of an exhausted infant. But I'd seen Caroline's expression shift from certainty to doubt, and doubt was a weakness I could exploit. That night, I woke to find Grandma sitting beside my crib in the darkness, her weathered face illuminated by moonlight streaming through the window. I know you're awake, she said softly. I froze, my baby act abandoned for a moment of genuine shock. You don't sleep like normal babies, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. You watch. You plan. And that incident today. She shook her head slowly. Emma, I've raised 3 children and helped with 7 grandchildren. I know babies. And you are no ordinary baby. My heart pounded in my tiny chest. I couldn't respond, couldn't explain. All I could do was stare at her with wide eyes. The question is, Grandma said, leaning closer, are you trying to hurt Susan? Or protect yourself? I made the only choice I could. Slowly, deliberately, I reached out and grasped her finger, tight, like a drowning person clutching a lifeline. Grandma's expression softened. Protect yourself, then. From what, little one? What did she do to you? If only I could speak. If only I could tell her about the stairs, the accident, the cold satisfaction in Susan's eyes as I'd lain broken at the bottom, barely clinging to life. About how Dad had blamed himself for leaving me alone with Susan when she was still recovering. About how no one had ever suspected. But words were still beyond me, so I did the only thing I could think of. I released her finger and pointed at Susan's portrait hanging on the wall, the official family photo from their wedding. Then I made a pushing motion with my tiny hands. Grandma went very still. She pushed you? When? I couldn't answer that. Instead, I mimed falling, then pointed to myself and shook my head violently. No. Bad. Hurt. Dear God, Grandma breathed. You're trying to tell me, are you saying Susan tried to hurt you? That she would try to hurt you? I nodded emphatically, grateful beyond words that she was taking me seriously. Grandma sat back in her chair, her face hard as stone. And the party? The champagne glasses. Another nod. Another mime of pushing. The vomiting today? I grinned mischievously and mimed fighting back. Defense. Protection. Grandma was quiet for a long moment, processing. Finally, she spoke, her voice heavy with emotion. I believe you. I don't understand how you know these things, how you can think and plan like this. But I believe you. Relief flooded through me so intensely, I actually started to cry, real tears this time, born of 3 months of silent terror and loneliness. Show us it. Grandma lifted me from the crib, holding me close. It's all right, my clever girl. We'll figure this out together. But Emma, she pulled back to look at me seriously.
We have to be smart about this.
I can't just accuse Susan without proof. Your father loves her. He won't believe it unless he sees it with his own eyes. I nodded, understanding. It wasn't enough for me to survive. We needed to expose Susan so thoroughly that even Dad couldn't deny it. So here's what we'll do, Grandma said, her strategic mind, the same one that had helped build the Johnson business empire alongside her late husband, kicking into gear. We set a trap. We give Susan exactly what she wants. The announcement came 3 days later, delivered by Dad at a family dinner that Grandma had specifically requested. Susan, Dad said, his voice formal, I've thought about what you said, about Emma needing to bond with you. And you're right. She should be in the main house with her parents. Susan's fork clattered against her plate. Jake? Really? Really? He looked tired, worn down by weeks of tension. But there are conditions. Nurse Caroline stays on for another month. And Mom visits every day. No exceptions. Of course, Susan breathed, her eyes bright with victory. Of course, whatever you think is best. Grandma maintained a worried expression, playing her part perfectly. Jake, are you sure? Emma's been so settled in the courtyard. She needs to adjust sometime, Mom. We can't keep avoiding this. I was moved to the main house the next day, installed in the pristine nursery that Susan had decorated in shades of pink and cream. Everything was expensive, tasteful, perfect, and completely devoid of warmth. Caroline set up a monitoring system, ostensibly to track my sleep patterns and health metrics, but Grandma and I knew it was really to document my behavior for Susan's narrative. What Caroline didn't know was that Grandma had hired her own tech expert to install additional cameras in the nursery, tiny and hidden, streaming directly to a secure server that only Grandma could access. Susan won't make her move immediately, Grandma had told me the night before. She'll wait until she's confident, until she thinks she's safe. That's when predators strike. For the first week, Susan was a model mother. She cooed over me during Caroline's observation periods, fed me carefully supervised bottles, changed my diapers while narrating every step for the nurse's benefit. You see, she told Dad one evening as he watched from the nursery doorway. We just needed time together. Emma's doing so much better. I played along, accepting her care with minimal fussing. Let her think she'd won. Let her confidence grow. But at night, when the house was quiet and Caroline had retired to her room, Susan's mask would slip. She'd stand over my crib in the darkness, her face illuminated by the nightlight, and I'd see the hatred burning in her eyes. You little demon, she'd whisper. You think you're so clever. But you're just a baby. And babies have accidents all the time. I'd stare back at her unblinking and watch her shudder. The breakthrough came on day 10. Dad had an emergency business trip, unexpected, unavoidable, 48 hours minimum. Grandma had a previously scheduled medical appointment in the city that would take most of the afternoon. Caroline had food poisoning from the new chef's experimental sushi, courtesy of a careful suggestion from Martha, who was loyal to Grandma and knew how to doctor raw fish just enough to make someone sick without causing serious harm. Susan was alone with me, with no observers, for 6 glorious hours. She waited until everyone had left, until the house was quiet except for the distant sounds of staff in the West Wing. Then she came to the nursery. Hello, Emma, she said, her voice devoid of all pretense. Just you and me now. She lifted me from the crib roughly, her fingers digging into my sides. I didn't cry, not yet. I needed her to do more, to commit fully. You know what I realized? Susan carried me toward the window, the same window from my past life, the one that overlooked the garden 2 stories below. Babies explore. They wiggle. And sometimes, tragic accidents happen when curious babies get too close to an open window. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. The hidden cameras were recording everything. I just needed her to say more, to do more. In my first life, my real life, you didn't exist, Susan continued, almost conversational now. I was going to be the perfect wife, the perfect Johnson daughter-in-law. But then you came along, looking exactly like me, stealing all the attention. Do you know how many people asked me at the hospital if I was jealous of how much Jake loved you? If I felt replaced? She was confessing. Actually confessing. I hadn't dared hope she'd be this careless. So I fixed it, Susan said, moving closer to the window. She fumbled with the lock one-handed, still holding me. I pushed you down the stairs when you were 1. It was perfect. You died, Jake blamed himself for not being there, and I got to be the grieving mother who'd lost everything. He spoiled me for years after that. The window opened. Cold air rushed in. But then, Susan's voice turned venomous. You came back. Somehow you came back and you remembered. I can see it in your eyes. You know what I did? Well, guess what? I can do it again. She lifted me toward the open window, her grip shifting to position me. Susan, stop. Dad's voice cracked through the room like a gunshot. Susan spun around, nearly dropping me. He stood in the doorway, his face white with horror, his phone held up and recording. Behind him, Grandma appeared, her expression grim but satisfied. The business trip was fake, Dad said hoarsely. Mom's appointment was fake. We needed to know, we needed to see. He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't seem to process what he'd just witnessed. Susan's face cycled through expressions, shock, fear, calculation, finally settling on desperate denial. Jake. Thank God you're here. I caught Emma crawling toward the window. She almost fell. I recorded everything, Dad said flatly. Every word. And Mom's cameras caught it all too. Susan's last mask shattered. What remained was pure, primal rage. You set me up. You used your own daughter as bait. You just tried to murder her, Grandma said coldly, while confessing to murdering her in a past life. Tell me, Susan, do you actually believe in reincarnation? Or are you simply insane? Both, probably, Susan spat. Then she turned to me, still clutched in her arms, and smiled. A terrible, broken thing. But it doesn't matter. If I can't have this life, neither can she. She lunged for the window. Dad moved faster than I'd ever seen him move, crossing the room in 3 strides. He grabbed Susan's arm, wrenching me from her grip. I tumbled through the air for a heart-stopping moment before Grandma caught me, her old hands surprisingly steady. Susan and Dad struggled near the window, her screaming incoherently, him trying to restrain her without hurting her. Then Susan did something that sealed her fate forever. She grabbed a decorative paperweight from the nearby dresser and swung it at Dad's head. The sound of impact was sickening. Dad staggered backward, blood streaming from his temple. Susan raised the paperweight again, her face twisted with madness. Martha appeared in the doorway with 2 security guards. They rushed Susan, pinning her arms and wrestling the weapon away. She fought like a wild animal, still screaming about past lives and stolen faces and how everything would have been perfect if I'd just stayed dead. As they dragged her from the room, still thrashing and raving, Dad collapsed against the wall, hand pressed to his bleeding head. His eyes found mine across the room. Emma, he whispered. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I reached for him, and this time, there was no pretense in my tears. Epilogue. Susan was declared legally insane and committed to a psychiatric facility. Her confession, captured on multiple cameras and witnessed by Dad, Grandma, and eventually the police, was more than enough evidence. The doctors said she'd had some kind of psychotic break, possibly postpartum psychosis that had gone untreated for months. Let them think that. It was easier than the truth. Dad recovered from his head wound, though he was never quite the same. The guilt ate at him, how he'd missed it, how he'd defended her, how he'd almost lost me twice. He threw himself into being a devoted father with an intensity that was both touching and exhausting. But it was Grandma who truly raised me, as she always had. In her courtyard sanctuary, surrounded by her books and her gardens and her quiet wisdom, I grew from an infant into a child who spoke early, thought deeply, and never forgot the woman who'd tried to kill her twice. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder about the cosmic rules that allowed me to come back. About whether Susan somehow knew, somehow remembered too. About whether this was always how it was supposed to end. But mostly, I just hold Grandma's hand and watch the butterflies dance among the flowers, grateful for this second chance at life. This time I won. And Susan? She'll spend the rest of her days locked away, her beauty fading, her memories of past lives blurring with medicated haze. Some might call that mercy. I call it justice. And I, Emma Johnson, am only just getting started.